Yo, what's up, boys and girls? It's BuzzWalks here, and I'm back at it again with the video. This time, something a little bit. Today, it has been a hot minute since you and I have talked face to face. But I'm glad to say that I am back, and I'm also glad to see you here too. So that being said, let's just jump into it. So if you guys do not know, I held a poll on my community tab on YouTube and also on my Twitter at Swolax, where I asked you guys, what should we talk about today? And that is going to be the state of heroes inside of 2019. The question that we're looking to answer today is, how good are heroes inside of 2019? Unfortunately, this is a hard question to answer with just a few simple words. In fact, doing research on this topic going all the way back to the beginning of Master Rule 4 into now, heroes have had a pretty interesting history inside of their rogue deck status. Now, if you're looking for the question, are heroes meta in 2019? Sad to say, I'm not quite sure about that. But to understand what's going on with heroes now and also in the future, we have to take a look back into mid-2018. Around May to July of 2018, heroes were probably at their best. Not only do we have powerful cards aiding the deck like Firewall Dragon, but most importantly, Izzle Back to Wizzle, Two Tails of the Noble Knights, was in full effect. Izzle Back to Wizzle was a part of so many warrior strategies in a lot of warrior decks, but especially in heroes, you can use this card to go into so much. Before we talk about that in particular, let's go ahead and break down essentially what was the hero strategy back mid-2018 that made it so good. Mid-2018, heroes were one of three things. Number one, they were a hero OTK deck using Vision Hero Vion, Anki, and Darklaw to set up mass change chains. There has to be a better way to say that. And able to deal massive damage to your opponents and just run over monsters. This was considered to be a relatively lower tier strategy as it wasn't necessarily effective in terms of control. Though this was a popular choice among some hero players, many preferred options 2 and 3. Options 2 and 3 consisted of using cards like Materia Beast, Darklaw, and Absolute Zero to help control and facilitate good first turn boards. In addition to that, the decks also ran extra floodgates and other negations that were helpful in aiding its control. Darklaw itself, being Macrocosmos on legs, is probably one of the best fusion monsters at the hero's disposal. And Darklaw turbo decks were no joke. Yes, there were a few decks that did specialize in this, and in particular, the deck really did struggle with going second, especially against decks like Gokis, Altergeist, and even in some cases, Trickstars. But the deck still had a fighting chance. Going first, setting up Darklaw and potentially Materia Beast, if your opponent did not have an answer to either of those two cards, the format was extremely spell reliant, and in addition to that, Darklaw banishing everything from the graveyard was just phenomenal. Add that on top of the fact that Darklaw's secondary effect to banish cards from hand whenever it was searched at random was a pretty nice cherry on top. Heroes back then didn't really want to do much other than the simplest of simple things. Control the board, scare the living jeebers out of your opponent, and then maybe last for the grind game and hit over everything with Honest Neos. Simple times for a simple deck. And though the deck didn't necessarily do anything in particularly broken, you could say the deck was relatively mid to high rogue tier. It wasn't the best deck in the meta, it lost to a lot of meta strategies, and especially going second, it really struggled. But most importantly, heroes had a fighting chance against these strategies just because Darklaw was such a prominent figure. Again, it wasn't necessarily an incredibly strong card, but it was just enough to stop your opponent from making plays that could net you a few wins. In mid-2018, the deck had at its disposal Firewall Dragon, Isolde Back to Wizzle, Two Tails of the Noble Knights, Materia Beast, Darklaw, and of course, 3 copies of Destiny Hero Malicious, which will come into play later. But for now, let's talk about late 2018. Heroes themselves didn't necessarily evolve from the time of mid-2018 to late 2018. Of course, our boy Stratos came back to 1, which again is kind of stupid, and I don't really get it. Here, my thing with it, it took away a Hero Lives going back to 1, and also Destiny Hero Malicious at 2. Now, whether some crazy fiend of alchemy just took those things and said, yeah, this is an equivalent exchange. What's the cost of a human soul? Or something, it really sucked for heroes. Now, Destiny Hero Malicious at 2 was probably the biggest detriment to the deck that I've seen in a very long time. It wasn't necessarily its fault, as it was more abused by the Dark Warrior turbo decks. These decks would pump out insane boards, ripping 6 cards out of your hand with things like Gumblar Dragon, and eventually would go into Rongo Bongo. This is incredibly important to note, as it was that heroes weren't necessarily the broken cards, but the engine of heroes with Vision Hero Vion and Destiny Hero Malicious were essentially the collateral damage of the Dark Warrior Turbo Gumblar blah 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 decks. Those changes to the hero deck really did hurt inside of the New Link era. Destiny Hero Malicious to 2 effectively made it a hard once per turn, as if you were running 2 copies in your deck, you could no longer get those extra materials just from having 1 copy inside of your graveyard. I myself was toying around with this concept and made it an insane, totally awesome hero deck that was super fun to play with. You could bust out Totally Awesome and bust out Darklaw, just like the old days. Elder Norton, come back. Don't get me wrong, having Stratos back at 1 is pretty cool, but with the changing times, took unfortunately one of the better engines that the hero has had at this disposal. Now we did get cards like Solid Soldier that was supposed to somewhat heal that wound. A Solid Soldier essentially just made Nateria Beast Turbo a little more consistent, and again, that's pretty cool. Late 2018 came with it a whole bunch of new struggles in the form of 2 decks. The first one being Thunder Dragons. Thunder Dragons debuted in the later half of 2018 with Soul Fusion. This deck was and is incredibly powerful, incredibly consistent, and it also gained advantage off of banishing. The Thunder Dragon cards gained effects, searches, and advantage based off of when they went to the graveyard or if they were banished, sometimes both. And the fact that one of Hero's best win conditions in the form of Elemental, keep on saying Elemental, Masked Hero Darklaw was currently one of its best moves, and that banished cards wasn't looking too viable at the time. In addition to that, it had big bodies and big monsters preventing searching with things like E-Emergency Call, Shadow Mist, even Rhoda, Vision Hero Vion adding Polymerization to hand. All of these things against Thunder Dragons shut down. And some of you may be thinking, well, duh, Heroes did not stand a chance against Thunder Dragons. No deck stands a chance against Thunder Dragons. Those things are one of the best decks in the meta. It's just another unfortunate scenario where Heroes had a bad matchup against one of the best, most prevalent decks, whereas other rogue tier strategies might have an advantage over it and or good strategies to play against it. Heroes really did fall short. And deck number 2 is Sky Strikers. Now, the Sky Striker engine, also Sky Striker deck as a whole, is probably one of the most interesting decks to talk about. Because on one hand, it isn't necessarily that broken, it isn't necessarily that insane. It doesn't set up 5 negates, totally broken, insane board, but it does win that resource grindy game and shuts off enough of the effects, particularly of Heroes, that makes it so good. Outside of the hero matchups, Sky Strikers was and continues to be one of the best, most prevalent decks inside the meta, similar to Thunder Dragon. And oh boy, look at that. Heroes unfortunately have another bad matchup against Sky Strikers. But surprisingly enough, it's actually not that bad comparatively to Thunder Dragon. Sky Strikers do rely a little bit on graveyard, especially graveyard setup with the spell cards. Having Ray in the graveyard to tag out and tag into different link monsters is the basic Sky Striker routine that you would see in any regular deck. Now, what makes that cool is that if they don't have an out to Darklaw, that can get pretty hairy for them, and in fact, the control aspect that they might want to put on the board gets a little bit more grindy, and they have to extend just a little bit further just to win the game. But yet again, and this is the unfortunate part, when you are running 3 copies of Widowmaker and 3 copies of Engage to search said Widowmaker, Darklaw is no longer an issue. Especially with Sky Strikers going first, but Sky Strikers going second can still add that Widowmaker, negate the effects of Darklaw, and just go for regular plays from there. In fact, in several instances, even taking the Darklaw if enough setup is available. And they don't even need to necessarily win the game in one turn. Sky Strikers are a relatively grindier deck. They don't need to OTK you. They don't need to roll over everything on board. And the fact that Widowmaker, Eagle Booster, and so many other cards like Multi-Roll are just so good. Oh my God. Heroes, 1, can't really keep up with that grind game, and 2, similar to Thunder Dragons, if Darklaw isn't a win condition there, Heroes are going to have a bad time. And if you can see a pattern with Heroes in late 2018 compared to mid 2018, you can see that Darklaw is kind of the pivot point. Whenever Darklaw is a really good card, Heroes are a pretty good deck. Whenever Darklaw is not necessarily that great, when it's not very good in the matchup, even if you have good cards, 1-card combos, can set up Nateria Beast, it really and ultimately doesn't matter. Which again is extremely unfortunate, but it's kind of how the cookie crumbles. Which now leads us into 2019 and the current state of Heroes inside of the current metagame. Now, I wrote down some notes that I'm gonna grab right here. So I wrote down a few things in my notebook in terms of what Heroes don't have / the problems with Heroes inside of 2019 at the current moment. So first things first, let me get this out of the way because I don't think I really need to address it that long. The extra heroes suck. One Driver is probably the most valuable inside the deck and probably the most viable inside the deck, but unfortunately it just doesn't do enough. And then dear God, Dreadmaster or Dreadnought, blah, whatever, is still garbage. If I sound bitter, it's because I am. I just need to make good extra heroes. You guys already know my thoughts and opinions on Crossman or Cross Guy. Ugh. I've already touched on the fact that Darklaw is no longer a win condition for the deck, which is unfortunate. It is the pivot card of the deck, and in 2019, unfortunately, Darklaw is 1, super easy to out. People are already side decking for problematic cards like Colossus and also for Titan, so things like Mind Control, Widow Anchor are things that you can see commonly to take care of your Darklaw. On a broader level, heroes in general aren't necessarily that innovative anymore and also don't necessarily have that protection. As someone who's been trying to build a new hero deck, has been someone trying to innovate and experiment with different engines, including Dangers, including Azathoth, the Time Thief, heroes have a lot of interesting things going for them, especially because of their access to the Dark Rank 4 engine. But unfortunately, heroes don't have enough protection, not enough combos, not enough interruptions, and they can't really afford to run hand traps at that high of a volume. I'm gonna take a quick detour and talk about Salamangreats for a second, because I feel like that's a deck that you guys may be familiar with. Salamangreats are really interesting to me because on one hand, they're not a very imposing deck. They're pretty weak monsters. They do like one or two things really, really well, but outside of that, it's pretty much it. They're not necessarily a tough deck to beat per se, but what makes them obnoxious is that they, one, have room to run hand traps in the main deck, and two, they can always get Salamangreat Roar or even Rage. Sometimes having multiple other floodgates like Rivalry, Goes in Match, and even some cases Imperial Order. And where the consistency in their board lies is not necessarily in those floodgates, but the fact that it can churn out consistently maybe 1 to 2 interruptions, which is not as much as we've seen from like Crusadia Guard Dragons, but it can do it enough times over and over and over again to really make those long, grindy games and those control aspects of it really, really good. In addition to that, even let's say you're down to your last resource, you really only need 1, maybe even 2 cards to get the combos going. It is a stellar deck, it is a pretty fair deck, and unfortunately, heroes do not mirror Salamangreats. Heroes don't have enough 2-card combos, they don't have enough 1-card combos, they don't have enough consistency boosters, they definitely can't churn out protection, and they can't really win that long grind game. I'm not saying good decks have to have these things. Hell, a lot of OTK-based decks, a lot of power decks, even some of the Danger, Thunder Dragon, Orcus, whatever decks, they don't necessarily go for the long games. They don't necessarily put up that many interruptions, but they put up just enough to where it's a problem for the opponent. Heroes, unfortunately, the deck space is really tight, and also the extra deck is also pretty tight. You have the Phantom Knights engine, maybe the Time Thieves engine, and of course the regular hero engine that you're doing. There's not necessarily enough starters, and you can't really get a lot of things going just off of 1, maybe 2 cards. So if your board does get dismantled, or if it goes longer into the game, you might not have that much material or that many resources to really pull from. At the end of the day, that's probably what the worst thing about Heroes inside of 2019 is. Yes, they have access to all these cool cards, heroes will always be heroes, and heroes will always be my favorite deck of all time. But if I'm being honest with myself, and if I'm being honest with you guys, I want to be straight up and tell you that heroes, they've kind of fallen from grace. This is not to say that I don't enjoy playing heroes. This is not to say I'm not going to continue to play heroes, not going to continue to experiment and try to elevate heroes to at least mid 2018 levels. But I'm gonna be real with you guys. Heroes might not have what it takes to compete inside the meta, and you might want to pick up something, if you're a GX fan that is, something like Cyber Dragons, or if you're a budget player, something like Salamangreats. That's kind of my advice and kind of where heroes are at in 2019. Now, this could all change with future packs and future support, but Konami does hate the GX era, they hate me, and they also hate Jade and Yuki, so who knows. Now, I mentioned and touched on the Azathoth and Time Thief engine with the rank 4s and Time Thief Redoer, but I'm going to be expanding upon those thoughts inside of a later video, and kind of encompasses what I feel about that engine inside of Heroes. Now, closing statements, I feel like this thing kind of broke my heart. To make this video, to record it for you guys, to talk to you guys about the current state of Heroes and what it's like to be a hero player inside of 2019. Sure, it's fun, sure, it's good at the local level, maybe regional level, with so many hits on the ban list, the collateral damage, and of course the unfortunate casualty of most of Yu-Gi-Oh!, and that is the power creep. Are heroes getting power crept out of the meta? I can't necessarily say for sure, and we will only find out with time. But that's just my opinions. What do you guys think of it? Let me pass the question on to you guys. What do you guys think of Heroes inside of 2019? Do you guys play Heroes? Do you guys like Heroes? Do you guys agree with my opinions? What is your experience playing with Heroes this past year? What do you guys think of the new hero support coming out in 2019? Do you guys think it will make a difference? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you guys like this video, make sure to leave a like if you want some more. Please subscribe for more videos coming in the pipeline, so stay tuned to that if you want to. But yeah, it's good to be back, and I'm glad that you guys are here with me. I will see you guys in the next video. Yeah, peace out.